Did you know a machine used to safely treat kidney stones in your local hospital shares a regulatory category with a nuclear detonator?
It sounds completely absurd, but yes, it does.
Right. Or, get this, that simply having a conversation with an international colleague over a cup of coffee could legally be considered an export punishable by decades in federal prison.
Yeah, people really don't realize how high the stakes are.
It's wild. So welcome to a brand new deep dive into the source material. Today, we are looking at this invisible high-stakes matrix of rules that govern how physical items, and even intangible ideas like you just heard, cross borders.
And we really do have an incredibly dense stack of sources today.
We do. We're talking excerpts from the U.S. Code of Federal Regulations, trade compliance blogs, university guidelines, and expert webinars on export controls. And the mission here is to decode how international trade actually functions behind the scenes for you.
Because it is a wild world once you peek behind the curtain. I mean, on the surface, moving goods around the globe looks like, just a mountain of mundane paperwork.
Just stamps and forms.
Exactly. But underneath, it is a highly sensitive, fiercely policed web of international law.
I really want to get into the mind-bending stuff later about conversations putting people in prison, but it seems like before we can talk about sending secrets or items out of the country, we have to understand the mechanics of how everyday things come in.
That's a great place to start.
Because bringing goods into the U.S. isn't just about paying a customs fee at the border, right? Looking at the material, it looks like a massive legal liability.
Oh, it is an enormous liability. And the reason why traces back to a major shift in the law, specifically in 1993 with the U.S. Customs Modernization Act.
The NOD Acts, right?
Right, often just called the MOD Act.
So what was happening in 1993 that required a whole modernization act?
Well, think about the explosion of global trade in the early 90s. I mean, the sheer volume of shipping containers arriving at U.S. ports was just skyrocketing.
Right, globalization was really taking off.
Exactly. And before the MOD Act, Customs actually bore the primary burden of examining shipments and catching errors, but they simply couldn't keep up with the volume anymore. It was impossible.
So they just flipped it.
Pretty much. The government fundamentally shifted the landscape. The MOD Act transferred the burden of compliance entirely onto the importer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it established this very strict legal concept known as reasonable care.
Meaning the government expects you, the importer, to do the heavy lifting before the cargo ship even docks.
Precisely. As an importer, exercising reasonable care means you are legally swearing that you can accurately answer 3 vital questions about every single shipment.
And those are?
What exactly are you importing, like down to its molecular level? How much does it actually cost, including hidden commissions or royalties? And where does it definitively come from?
Okay, let's stick with that first question for a second. The what is it part, because this is where I was completely lost looking at the material.
Yeah, the classification part is dense.
It is an absolute alphabet soup of product codes.
Yeah.
I mean, there are HS codes, HTS codes, and Schedule B codes. Where does a business even start if they just want to classify a product they are bringing in?
It is incredibly convoluted, I'll admit, but there is a logic to it. It all starts with the harmonized system, or the HS code.
Okay.
This is a 6-digit number administered by the World Customs Organization. You can think of it as the foundational language of global trade. About 98% of the world agrees on these first 6 digits.
Okay, let me see if I can translate this into something I can actually picture. Tell me if this analogy works.
Sure, go for it.
So that 6-digit HS code, that's basically like buying a general admission ticket to get into a massive global stadium. It gets you through the front gates, everyone recognizes it.
Right.
But the 10-digit code we use here in the US, the HTS, or Harmonized Tariff Schedule code,
Right.
that's customs finding your exact specific seat in that stadium, so they know exactly how much to charge you for the ticket. Is that correct?
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Yes, the first 6 digits put you in the right section of the stadium, say, electronic machinery.
Got it.
But the U.S. government adds those extra digits to pinpoint the exact seat. Those final digits distinguish whether that machinery is, say, a consumer television or a specialized industrial monitor.
Which would have completely different taxes.
Exactly, and that distinction strictly dictates the specific tax or duty you owe the U.S. government for imports.
That makes sense. But the sources highlight a massive trap here involving a third set of codes, the Schedule B codes. How do those fit in the whole stadium analogy?
Well, Schedule B codes are where a lot of companies get themselves into deep trouble.
If they mix them up.
Yes. While HTS codes are used for imports to calculate taxes, Scheduled B codes are a completely separate 10-digit system administered by the Census Bureau strictly for monitoring what leaves the country.
So exports.
Right. They are statistical tools. Because they are meant for gathering data, not collecting taxes, Schedule B codes are often much broader and easier to classify than the import codes.
Oh, I see where this is going. So the trap is people get lazy. They just grab the broader export code and slap it on their import paperwork because it's just easier to find.
That happens all the time, and Customs considers it a severe violation.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. If you use a broad Schedule B export code to import an item, you might inadvertently bypass the highly specific HTS code that carries a much higher duty rate.
Oh, because it's less specific. You might pay less tax.
Exactly. And in the eyes of the government, you aren't just making a clerical error. You are committing fraud by attempting to evade taxes.
Wow. And you cannot use a Schedule B code for imports, right? That's what the sources said.
Correct. You can use HTS codes for exports in a pinch, but using Schedule B for imports is just a massive red flag.
That is a huge trap. And the trade compliance blogs actually outline some other major pitfalls that sound just as easy to stumble into.
Oh, there's so many.
For example, a business owner might think, I'm just buying my parts from Canada and we have a free trade agreement, so I don't need to worry about all this compliance.
Yeah, claiming a good is duty-free under the USMCA, which replaced NAFTA, is actually one of the biggest red flags you can possibly wave at customs.
Wait, really? But we have a treaty.
We do, but importers often assume that if a product is shipped from a Canadian warehouse, it's a Canadian product.
Which makes sense logically.
Sure, logically. But if the components of that product were actually manufactured in China, assembled in Canada, and then shipped to the US, it might not qualify for duty-free status at all.
Oh, wow. Because the origin is technically China.
Exactly. And if you claim that NAFTA or USMCA exemption without an airtight paper trail proving the origin of the raw materials, Customs won't just come after you for the missing duties.
They find you.
They can penalize you for a percentage of the entire value of the goods. It can be devastating.
There was another red flag that really surprised me, actually. Rapid business growth.
Ah, yes.
You would think the government wants companies to succeed, but apparently, if your imports increase by like 500% year over year, Customs sees that as a problem.
Well, from a business perspective, 500% growth means you're popping champagne. Right.
You're thrilled.
But from a regulatory perspective, Customs assumes your underlying compliance infrastructure hasn't scaled proportionately with your sales.
Oh, they think you're overwhelmed.
Precisely. If you are moving 5 times the volume of goods with the exact same 2-person logistics team, the statistical probability is that you are cutting corners and making mistakes.
So how does a company survive that level of scrutiny? The material talks about building the 3 pillars of import compliance.
Yeah, those pillars are the armor that protects a company. Pillar 1 is a cross-functional compliance team.
Meaning not just one guy in a back room.
Exactly. The government wants to see that compliance isn't just one overworked person in a basement. It has to involve logistics, purchasing, accounting, and engineering.
Okay, and Pillar 2?
Pillar 2 is a robust internal audit process.
What does that actually look like in practice, though?
It means you don't just trust the paperwork handed to you by your freight forwarder. A true internal audit traces a transaction from the initial purchase order through the shipping documents all the way to the final bank payment to the overseas vendor.
So you're auditing your own supply chain.
Right. You are actively hunting for discrepancies like, say, a hidden engineering fee paid to the vendor that wasn't declared on the customs value, and catching those errors before the government does.
Okay, got it. And Pillar 3?
The compliance manual. And this cannot be a dusty, generic binder sitting on a shelf.
Let me guess, it has to be updated.
Constantly. It is the literal, physical manifestation of your reasonable care. It has to map out your company's specific procedures. If customs agents knock on your door for an audit, they won't ask if you have a manual. Their very first request will be to see it.
So they want to see the receipts. Okay, so if the intense scrutiny on importing is primarily about protecting government revenue and controlling the borders, what happens when we reverse the flow?
It's completely different.
Yeah, because sending things out of the country seems like it shifts from protecting taxes to protecting national security and human lives, really.
It is a complete paradigm shift. There is a core concept that underpins every single export law in the United States, and that is, exporting is a privilege, not a constitutional right.
A privilege.
Exactly. If you want to engage in international trade, you accept that this privilege comes with stringent, absolute responsibilities.
So you can't just claim ignorance.
Not at all. In fact, if federal agents launch an investigation into your shipments, there is no innocent until proven guilty regarding your paperwork. There's a presumption of non-compliance if you lack the proper records.
Wow.
The burden is entirely on you to prove you did everything right.
I want to walk through how the government actually monitors this, because it's not just one agency checking boxes at the port. Let's say I'm a business owner and I just want to ship a pallet of commercial auto parts to a buyer overseas.
Yeah.
What is the baseline mechanism for getting that out of the country legally?
So the baseline is governed by the Foreign Trade Regulations, or the FTR. Okay.
Which is administered by the Census Bureau under the Department of Commerce.
Right.
This is the administrative tracking side of exporting. It focuses purely on the physical movement of goods.
Right.
When you ship that pallet of auto parts, you are generally required to file what's called Electronic Export Information, or EEI, through the Automated Export System, AES.
So it's an electronic database.
Yes, it's how the U.S. tracks what is leaving its shores and gathers economic data.
But surely there are exceptions, right? I mean, if I'm mailing a $50 replacement part to a customer in Toronto, I'm not logging into some federal database, file an EEI.
You're right, there are exemptions. For instance, you generally don't have to file that electronic paperwork for shipments valued under $2,500.
Okay, that makes sense.
Or for most routine commercial shipments going to Canada. However, you have to be incredibly careful because there are strict exceptions to those exemptions.
Wait, exceptions to the exemptions? Meaning, even if the shipment is tiny or going to a friendly neighbor like Canada, the nature of the item overrides the exemption. Exactly. Even if a shipment to Canada is worth only $500, if it contains rough diamonds or a used vehicle, or if the item requires a specific export license, the exemption is void. You absolutely must file the paperwork.
Okay, so that covers standard physical goods. But earlier we talked about medical devices and nuclear detonators. Here's where it gets really interesting. Because if an item isn't just a standard auto part, how does the government regulate things that have a darker potential?
That takes us beyond the basic administrative reporting of the FTR and into the realm of the Export Administration Regulations, the EAR.
The EAR.
Right, overseen by the Bureau of Industry and Security, or BIS. The EAR is designed to control dual-use items.
Dual use, meaning commodities, software, and technology that have completely legitimate commercial applications, but could easily be repurposed for military or proliferation uses.
Exactly, and the scope of what is considered dual use is breathtaking.
This is where those examples completely blew my mind in the sources. You look at a standard, older office fax machine, totally innocuous. But the telecom relay inside that fax machine is built to switch electrical signals incredibly fast.
Right.
And according to the webinars, that exact same relay can be extracted and used to build a reliable trigger system for an improvised explosive device.
It's terrifying, honestly.
Or the lithotripter, that medical device used in hospitals to safely break up kidney stones using shock waves. It functions using a component called a spark gap, which handles high voltage, fast-switching electrical currents.
Yes.
That precise spark gap technology is the exact mechanism needed to detonate a nuclear device.
Which fundamentally alters how a company has to view its own products.
What's fascinating here is that under the ER, an export isn't just a box on a cargo ship.
It's bigger than that.
Much bigger. The jurisdiction extends far beyond the physical product itself. The ER applies a legal standard called reason to know.
Reason to know. Yes, these rules apply to everyone in the transaction chain. You are legally responsible for knowing not just what you are selling, but who your buyer is, who their affiliated companies are, and what they ultimately intend to do with that smart gap or that telecom relay.
So if the government is monitoring medical devices and fax machines that closely, just for their potential use, what does the security look like for actual literal weapons?
Oh, that requires an entirely different regulatory framework known as the ITAR.
International Traffic in Arms Regulations?
Exactly. The ITAR is overseen by the State Department, and it strictly controls items on the United States Munitions List, the USML. We are talking about defense articles, military hardware, satellite technology, and specialized defense services.
And this is where we hit what has to be the most terrifying concept in this entire deep dive, the deemed export trap.
It trips up so many people.
Because the government isn't just tracking the physical missiles or the blueprints in a briefcase, they are tracking the knowledge itself. I keep thinking about this chilling real-world example in the material.
The university professor.
Yes, there is a college professor working on a highly technical, defense-related project. He had a teaching assistant helping him in the lab, and that TA happened to be a Chinese national. The professor shared controlled technology specifications and drawings with his TA. The technology never physically left the United States.
Not at all.
It just moved across a lab bench in a university. But the professor went to federal prison for sharing info with his own student.
It is a harsh and unforgiving reality. That is the exact mechanism of a deemed export.
Can you explain how that actually works legally?
Sure. The law, specifically in the CFR, states that releasing technical data, proprietary know-how, or software, and that includes object code or source code, to a foreign person inside the United States is legally the exact same thing as loading that technology onto a plane and shipping it to their home country.
That's unbelievable.
The export is deemed to have occurred the absolute second the knowledge is transferred.
Think about that for a second. If you are a manager at a tech company and you call an international colleague over to your desk to look at a line of source code on your screen to help you troubleshoot a bug, you haven't just shared information. In the eyes of the US government, you just exported that source code across international borders.
Yes. The physical location of the conversation is totally irrelevant. The nationality of the person receiving the information dictates the export.
So you've locked down the physical weapons, you're tracking the dual-use technology, and you're even policing the thoughts and knowledge in a researcher's head. But none of that matters if you can't cut off the money funding the buyers. How does the government track the finances behind all this?
They track the money through the Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC.
Run by the Treasury Department.
Right. OFAC manages the nation's economic sanctions programs. We're talking about comprehensive embargoes on places like Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Syria, and the Crimea region of Ukraine.
Okay.
But it is much more complex than just blocking wires to foreign capitals.
Right, because it's not like a sanctioned entity puts Bond Villain LLC on their corporate letterhead. How do companies actually trace who they're doing business with?
So OFAC maintains what's called the Specially Designated Nationals List, the SDN list.
The SDN list.
Exactly. This is a massive, constantly updating ledger of specific individuals, front companies, and terrorist organizations that U.S. persons are strictly prohibited from doing business with. And the mechanism OFAC uses to enforce this is called the 50% rule.
How does that 50% rule work in practice?
Let's say you want to do business with a seemingly legitimate logistics company in Europe. But if you dig into their corporate structure, you find that Company A owns 25% of it, and Company B owns another 25%.
Okay.
If both Company A and Company B are on the SDN list, their aggregated ownership hits 50%.
Oh.
Instantly, that European logistics company is radioactive. You are completely prohibited from interacting with them, even if the logistics company itself isn't explicitly named on the SDN list. You have to trace those shadow networks of ownership, directly or indirectly.
And the penalties for getting any of this wrong, whether it's failing to trace OFAC ownership, misclassifying a dual-use item under the EAR, or accidentally committing a deemed export under ITAR, are staggering.
They really are.
I mean, the sources show fines can soar from $300,000 to over $1.2 million per single violation.
Violation, yes.
You can lose your export privileges entirely, effectively killing your ability to do international business overnight. And, as we saw with the professor, you can face up to 20 years in federal prison.
It is a high-stakes environment where ignorance of the law is absolutely not a defense. And, you know, a lot of listeners might be thinking, well, my company doesn't manufacture military hardware and we don't move millions of dollars through shell companies, so I'm safe.
But look at where these laws are clashing right now.
Yeah.
These massive federal regulations born out of the Cold War and national defense are colliding directly with one of our most inherently open and collaborative institutions.
University system.
Exactly. Universities.
It is a massive cultural friction point. Universities operate on the fundamental principle of freely sharing knowledge, publishing findings, and collaborating globally.
So how do they survive these export laws?
To protect this open environment, higher education relies heavily on a carve-out in the regulations called the Fundamental Research Exclusion, or the FRE.
How does that exclusion protect them?
Basically, if basic and applied scientific research is conducted at an accredited institution in the U.S., and the resulting information is intended for publication and broad dissemination in the scientific community, it is generally exempt from export controls.
Okay, so the government allows the free flow of that foundational science.
Yeah, usually.
But the material from UC Merced provides a checklist of red flags where a university could accidentally step outside that protection and violate federal law.
And it happens easier than you'd think.
Right. One of the biggest red flags is the type of technology being researched. Obviously, working on military hardware or space systems is risky, but it also includes emerging technologies, right? Like bioagents, advanced encryption, artificial intelligence, and quantum sensing.
Exactly. A second major red flag involves who you are collaborating with. Engaging with researchers from heavily sanctioned countries or countries designated as military end users MUs.
Like who?
Nations like China, Russia, or Venezuela. That carries intense scrutiny. There are strict controls around institutions in those nations because they often integrate civilian university research directly into their military development pipelines.
But the third red flag really highlights the mechanism of how this works, accepting money from high-risk sponsors.
Right. Funding sources are key.
If a lab takes a grant from, say, the National Institutes of Health for basic biomedical research, that's relatively low risk. But if they take funding from the Department of Defense, DARPA,
Right.
or a private defense contractor, the risk profile skyrockets.
Because the underlying intent of the research fundamentally changes.
Right.
The Department of Defense might fund basic materials science research, but ultimately they are doing so to find a strategic military advantage, not just to advance human knowledge.
Okay, let's unpack this. If a university researcher is just doing basic science, but they want to collaborate with a defense contractor, and they sign a standard non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, to look at some of the contractor's proprietary data for the project, just to see the data, what happens to their open academic lab?
That simple signature can absolutely devastate the lab's open status.
Just an NDA.
Yes. And here's the mechanism behind why that happens. It's called poisoning the research.
Who's eating it?
The fundamental research exclusion requires that the research outputs be completely unrestricted. If the researcher accepts restricted proprietary information from the defense contractor and uses it as a fundamental input for their research, that is the first strike.
Yeah.
If the sponsor's NDA also restricts the researcher's ability to freely publish the resulting outputs or restricts foreign national students from participating in the project, the FRE is instantly destroyed.
The research is poisoned. It is no longer considered fundamental research in the eyes of the federal government.
Exactly. The resulting research outputs, the lab data, the software code, the developmental prototypes, they all instantly become subject to strict federal export controls.
Wow. So what does the university have to do then?
The university now has to implement heavily restricted physical access to the lab, vet all partners through restricted party screening, secure the servers, and potentially apply for federal licenses just to let their own international graduate students continue their studies.
That sounds like a nightmare.
It is. Failure to recognize that shift risks immense reputational and legal damage to the entire institution.
It really reframes how you look at the world around you. And that is what we want you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive. The next time you order a specialized part from overseas for your business, or you sign a seemingly routine NDA for a new tech project, or you just hop on a Zoom call to screen share source code with an international colleague, realize that you are not just doing business.
You're really not.
You are actively navigating an invisible, highly policed web of international law. The simple act of communicating knowledge is governed by the exact same mechanisms that track the movement of munitions.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it raises an incredibly profound question that the current regulations are only barely beginning to grapple with.
Which is?
Well, we've established that the law defines an export as transferring technology, even just a visual inspection of source code or proprietary know-how to a foreign person.
Right.
But as we move deeper into an era where advanced artificial intelligence models and massive data sets of synthetic biology can be transmitted instantly across decentralized global networks, how can a regulatory framework built fundamentally on physical borders and physical nationalities possibly contain the flow of human and artificial knowledge?
That is a wild thought to end on. Can a system designed to track shipping containers and fax machines survive in the age of decentralized AI? It's a great question, because the reality is, the line between a civilian tool, a piece of academic research, and a global threat is getting thinner every single day. So the next time you see a medical device safely breaking up kidney stones at a hospital, just remember, you might be looking at the exact technology needed to detonate a nuclear weapon. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.